So thank you, Jumi-san, for joining in this conversation with AsiaBiz today. With Sushi Tech just about a week away, I wanted to understand more around, what is happening within the startup ecosystem in Japan.
Sure. Thank you for this time. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Right. So Japan has long been known for, world-class research, particularly in engineering and material science. So from your perspective, what has historically prevented this research from translating into globally scalable startups? And how is that changing today?
Sure. So let's put this question in this way. For the past 10 years, Japan has been progressing in commercializing the research. Like in University of Tokyo, over the past 10 years, we have seen more and more startups coming up. So in terms of the number of startups created, we have seen a dramatic increase. But regarding your question, shifting into next stage where those startups should grow more globally, you know, scale more globally. And I think some of the issues to solve to go to that next stage, I think one is the diverse perspective. So now, the startup, I would say almost all of the startups in Japan form a pretty much domestic, team, CEO, Japanese, CTO, Japanese, and all the other members are all Japanese. So their strategy tends to be limited to the domestic market as well. Yes, some startups, trying to go, beyond that and go overseas, but still lack of diversity prevents the team from hiring more talent. And similar to that, another point is maybe, weak global connectivity. When it comes to, global scale, they need to have more extensive network of investors or mentors in general, industry experts, or peer founders, who teach them how to start and grow the startups. Many of them are Japanese, again. So that actually prevents them from gaining more information on how to do business globally. That's the second part. And maybe those two kind of lead to I think, a final point, which is they kind of don't really feel competitive pressure. You know, they feel somewhat comfortable, especially University of Tokyo and startups, are easily regarded as good startups, whatever they are, because they're from University of Tokyo. But once they are in outside of Japan, then, very few know what the University of Tokyo is like. And it's really hard for those teams or renowned researchers to get out of the comfort zone. And that competitive pressure is one of the few things that actually push the startups to grow more than they can handle, actually. So those kind of things are maybe those that they need to embrace in the future.
Tokyo Innovation Platform Company, you work closely in commercializing academic research. So what are the most critical ingredients needed to turn university research into venture scale businesses? I mean, you definitely did touch upon just now about let's say, the lack of awareness about University of Tokyo. So, I mean, so that's an institutional challenge itself. So, I mean, are there any steps being taken? I mean, typically the US universities, the MITs and the Stanford, which are so well known. So, is Japan, with the kind of work that's happening at the university level, are there any steps being taken to basically commercialize academic research and take it overseas?
Yes. So again, commercialization now has been more and more active. But the point is commercialization in a global scale. So definitely the world-class technology is necessary, which is already here or there at the universities. But besides that, first founders, founder is more important than the other. And usually the startup entrepreneur in Japan, are not too experienced. Many of them in the past 10 years went to the business SaaS or software industry. So those who have experience in startup and innovation in the academic technologies, which have more bigger depth of valley or bigger kind of gap between funding and commercialization. Those entrepreneurs are definitely necessary, and we need to extend the network of entrepreneurs outside of Japan as well. So operators, founders, who can actually execute the plan is essential. And another thing is the venture capital fund. The venture capital fund in Japan is good at growing the startup to take them to the public market in Japan, like Japanese market exchange, growth market exchange. But they're not really good at bringing them to global M&A or global IPO. So the venture capital fund from the US, maybe, for example, or maybe in Singapore, are definitely necessary. We know how to grow them, in a capital perspective. I think that's more important than the previous two things, actually, is the diverse community of supporters. Like in the US, in Singapore, there are a number of not-for-profit organizations that have a broad network of industry experts or fellow peer founders or venture capital firms are like. Usually, in Japan, the support network is very closed and private. They try not to expose the startups to, extensive broader community, because often the venture capitalists are the ones that actually, support the startups. Venture capitalists tend to actually make the private, startups more secretive. So more open, wide open, community of supporters is necessary, which is kind of against the culture of Japan. So bringing that kind of, community-based support is definitely important.
So what kind of role can some of the large, industrial corporations play in this regard? Because many markets, you see the large companies basically setting up these incubators and accelerators where they adopt the kind of startups, invest into them, and kind of take them into either market or probably embrace the technology that the startup is developing. So you see a role for corporations in Japan, and are they kind of stepping up?
Yeah, roles of Japanese corporations are, more important than ever. And I think Japanese corporations have been working on this topic for a long time, and some of them are figuring out, how startup work for them. But on the other hand, the Japanese corporation should embrace the Japanese culture to grow beyond the Japanese corporation's expectations as well. For example, logistics companies in Japan and logistics companies in the US, or UPS or something, innovation programs in the US from corporations, except the startups, to not only contribute, to the host companies, but to actually change the world, change the, industry. Whereas Japanese, corporations tend to think of the startups as the entities that bring new ideas to their companies. So that's kind of a big difference, that the Japanese corporation needs to fill in. And once they can do that, I think they will attract, startups not only from Japan but from all over the world.
So you earlier on you mentioned about a lack of exposure or scale in terms of globally scaling up. So how do you think can more international founders or startups be kind of attracted towards Japan in terms of, I mean, is language does language and culture become a big barrier for overseas founders to come into Japan?
Well, for the past last year and this year, more and more founders, are flowing into Japan actually, which is unprecedented, I would say. I think that's just because of like all differences that have been, experienced for the past 2 years. But language barrier is not really the issue actually. When Japanese startups want to go out in the barrier maybe, or in Singapore, maybe language barrier might matter, because they need to be really fluent in what they want to communicate. But when it comes to the overseas foreign investors or entrepreneurs, are actually many Japanese who can speak English. But the barrier is, again, the culture stuff, the way of thinking in terms of entrepreneurship. Again, the startup should take more risk, and the startup should get out of comfort zone, and they have to, interact with a diverse, a community of people, including investors and entrepreneurs. Even if they want to take the researchers to that side, sometimes they feel a bit, feel worried. But maybe if I am to make things more simple, maybe the big success case, is still lacking. Now in Japan, like, I don't know, Apple or OpenAI or maybe Microsoft, it's easy. Or maybe most recently, maybe Cursor or Marcor that have achieved 5 million US in revenue, for the first 6 months. So college undergrads are looking, at those startups, and they want to be those, startups too, startup entrepreneurs too. But in Japan, Cursor or, a Marcor are kind of in a different world. Very hard for them to imagine that there will be entrepreneurs, like those. So having a big success, chicken and egg problem, makes them, do more, but they have to do more to be, to show a big success. So it's chicken and egg problem.
You've been closely associated with the National Innovation Network for Entrepreneurs Japan, 9JP,
Yes.
and its research-driven initiatives. So, what's the role that 9JP has been playing in terms of bridging the gap between early stage research seeds and real startup opportunities?
Sure. So IJP to me is the organization that provides more broader community that I've been mentioning. Usually, the 9JP, 9 means 9 consortiums for each local, area. Each local area provides local communities or local investors who support the startups, which is so close, private, and which is so narrow. So the balance between the world-class technology and the very local, small community of supporters is not really good. So 9, JP, I believe, cuts in that gap between the world-class technology and the community. So I at least expect, a 9JP to bring, for example, people like us or people like, innovation program or writer program from the US or from UK or from Singapore, to come in. So 9JP kind of, bridges a gap between the world-class technology and, international founders or global investors, or maybe diverse evaluation frameworks for Japanese startups.
At this year's Sushi Tech Tokyo edition, 9JP's Research Seeds division is quite prominently featured, and there's a lot of collaboration going on there. So, in your view, how important are platforms like Sushi Tech, in giving visibility to deep tech innovations emerging from Japan's research ecosystem?
So such tech is very important, I think. Very, very important. In a sense that it connects people from outside can just, casually come in to Japan and meet with, whoever they know. But again, it takes time, for Japanese people to like build trust. And it takes time for those people to build trust with Japanese people. But somehow fish tech kind of plays a role of shortening the time that they need to foster the trust relationship. So in that sense, it's very important. But fish tech should be regarded as an entry point. If they come to fish tech and they just come back to their countries and do nothing, no additional follow-ups, then that connection definitely vanishes in a week, at the earliest. So fish tech definitely plays a role of connecting people and producing one of the best entry points possible in Japan. So that's, I think, I frame fish tech as an entry point to the global community.
If you had to describe Japan's research ecosystem in a sentence to a global founder or investor attending Sushi Tech, what would you say? How would you describe?
I think it's a kind of showcase of, world class base of technology in Japan, and that need more integration, with like global talent or capital or community. So it's kind of diamond in the rough. Somebody has to polish it, but there are diamonds in the rough. It's not just stones. So I think entrepreneurs or investors or any other ecosystem builders from the world should come to such tech, to find those diamonds in the rough.
The personal level, I mean, you worked across geographies. You worked in Japan, in the US, and China. So, what are the kind of impressions you have? I mean, which you think Japan could probably do differently to ensure its deep tech startups can compete globally? I mean, you did mention early on about some of the factors, but if you were to compare specifically, let's say US and China, because even China, from the face of it, has some similarity to the Japanese market in the sense that it's completely homegrown. And,
Yeah.
again, the language challenge is there. So, not too many international startups going into China, but it's more unicorns that have come out of China. So, I mean, how would you kind of compare? And are there any lessons to be learned there? Something that Japan could do?
Yes, I think there are so many things that Japan can contribute to the world, as of now. For example, in the physical AI space. Physical AI, I usually call it new manufacturing, software built manufacturing, not like industry robotics. More complicated, complex, generative AI based. Hardware influences software, software influences hardware, and no single country have achieved a good combination of software, data, and hardware yet. And one country cannot achieve this. US struggling for hardware. Japan may be struggling for software, but good at hardware or manufacturing. So Japan, so for that, I would say I would call it, physical AI war or competition. Then coordinating each country's strength is very important. And Japan is kind of in a pivotal position. Which country can take the Japanese manufacturing strength? And Japan is opening, its door, to maybe China, maybe to the US, maybe Singapore, and providing the supply chain, hardware, software. So that's kind of one of the example. But that kind of thing, the same thing goes for energy sector, food sector, and material sector as well, and maybe semiconductor as well. So Japan is opening up, the industry that their strength is lies in. And again, now the ecosystem cannot be closed in one country. And currently, US, China kind of, are against each other and, competing, for the market. So I think including Japan is, for both of the countries is necessary. And Japan should be really flexible, in terms of, having a relationship with China or US. So I think Japan has been in a very unique position, a more unique position than any time in the past.
You rightly mentioned about the industrial robotics and the physical AI part. So I mean, historically, Japan was way ahead when it came to industrial robotics, but somewhere in between, when as the so US and China worked around the LLMs and stuff like that. I mean, Japan seems to have. I mean, do you think that there is a kind of a gap or a phase where Japan kind of took it too easy and really didn't catch up on this?
Oh, so again, physical AI is a combination of hardware and software, and Japan was strong in hardware. In the industrial robotics, like Yaskawa or FANC, they, yes, do incorporate some software in it, but the software or the data management is quite simple because the motors are big and, the environment of around the robot stay the same. The data is kind of always almost the same as well. the movement is the same. So industrial robots are not really robots in a contemporary sense. So the future robotics is more complex. Maybe drone is one of the first new manufacturing ecosystem. But there could be more than drones. So in that sense, it's not that Japan was lacking. Hardware came first in the 1980s, 1970s, and then software took over. And now in 2020, then hardware and software are somehow trying to get combined. So US is lacking in terms of hardware. Japan is lacking in terms of software. China might be doing good for both sides, but again, China is kind of closed in one country as well. So no country is now equipped with full components of the physical AI hardware. So it's not about, manufacturing competition. We frame it as more of a ecosystem changing. So yeah, very exciting, era, I think.
On that note, I mean, if you were to look ahead, which areas of research or deep tech that Japan is working on, I mean, if you were to identify three strongest areas where there is potential to produce globally significant startups over the next 5 to 10 years coming out of Japan, which are those three areas that you would identify?
Well, that's a good question. First is again robotics or new manufacturing or physical AI, whatever it's called. The second is semiconductors, which is really so. Let's just make it one. Semiconductor robotics. These spaces. Semiconductors is now involved in much geopolitical competition as well. And actually, advanced materials is something that Japan has spent pretty much time on. And for the materials research, the data is more important than that. So that's the second one. And maybe energy sector, thermal energy, or whatever energy. Because Japan's research has been focusing on how to be really important, independent in terms of energy and supply. So they have been accumulating tons of data around that as well. So well, there are a couple of others, but if you say three, then I would bring up the three sectors.
So, lastly, on the culture aspect, I mean, Japan is a very competitive society. And typically, the DNA of founders and startups is to overcome fear of failure, right? I mean, you fail 10 times, probably the 11th time you are a success. So, in that regard, I mean, is the culture changing? Is there more acceptability now to failures among the younger generation? How is the society coping up?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's changing, but it's not really changing in a massive way. Um, Gradually, in any time and in anywhere, you can find genius who is out of the average zone. So if you're talking about that average zone, and if the average zone is moving up, not really. The culture is kind of rooted in a very deep sense. But what is really changing is again the external environment where foreign investors coming in, foreign acceleration of coming in. So eventually, those entrepreneurs are exposed to those cultures, and they kind of change accordingly. Deep cultural behavior might not change, but they might kind of change in a way that they can be suited for more entrepreneurial world outside of Japan, just in the way they did back in 1960s.
Wonderful. Thanks for sparing this time. And I hope to see you in Tokyo next week.
Yes, please let me know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.